It would seem that most women would consider it a lifelong goal to be married to one of the wealthiest guys in the planet. Things like private planes, enormous mansions, and the chance for a life most people can only dream of are what I mean. Elon Musk's first wife, tech magnate Justine, had a quite different experience. She decided to quit what had begun as a passionate romance because she could no longer sustain the lifestyle it had become. When things finally became too much? When he appeared to have it all, why did she decide to leave him? How did their once perfect love blossom into a tragic failure? In this video, we're exploring the ins and outs of their troubled marriage to reveal the turning point that could surprise you with the answer to that question. It was never Justine's intention to develop feelings for Elon Musk. Actually, she wasn't even on the hunt for a romantic partner when fate brought them together. She attended Ontario's Queen's University with the intention of becoming a writer. She was the type to get lost in literature, have lofty aspirations, and tread carefully when it came to matters of the heart, particularly following a split that made her more than a bit apprehensive. Life, however, had other plans, and Elon Musk ended up becoming hers. He wasn't the kind to strut his stuff or be easygoing. Catching her attention is what you would anticipate. Elon exuded an air of unmistakable ambition, sharpness, and elegance. His South African accent added to his professional demeanor. Among his fellow students, he stood out. Elon could choose his party companions and casual dates all he wanted, but his heart belonged to Justine. At least according to Justine, their journey didn't begin with a love spark. Elon, on the other hand, fell head over heels. Something about Justine stayed with him when he saw her at the party. Her unassuming self-assurance or her lack of an air of superiority may have contributed. Elon was determined to get to know her for whatever reason, and he doesn't let up until he achieves his goals. Elon unexpectedly showed up a few days later and started talking to Justine as she was running to her room. They had supposedly met at the party, he said. Elon persisted regardless of Justine's lack of memory. Asking her out for ice cream was his most confident move. Nevertheless, she declined. Normally, someone like Elon would have just let it go. Hours later, he found her again, but this time he was carrying 2 ice cream cones that were melting, one for her and one for himself. Something felt off. While it may have been a bit dramatic, it was also difficult to overlook. It wasn't only the ice cream that made Elon see Justine in a different light, it was his willingness to go to extremes to prove it. That was more than the beginning of their romance, it was a taste of Elon Musk's personality. Impetuous, relentless, and devoid of ordinary. Unlike he appeared to be sincere in his interest in her, being in Elon's company initially felt rejuvenating. Her ambition was admirable, and he particularly loved her desire to publish her writing. It was refreshing to see him do more than simply watch from the sidelines, he was an active advocate for her. Elon was unfazed by the distance, even when he relocated to the US to attend Wharton. Elon wasn't idly passing the time in Ontario, she began to get roses at her doorstep, one after the other. It was all business. It was a novel form of devotion for Justine. She felt heard, appreciated, and supported to the point where she began to think they could create something special together. In particular, she remembered a single incident. She spoke about her hope to see her own books on the shelves of a bookstore while they were out on a date. People used to laugh or be skeptical when you made a confession like this. Elon, though, paid heed. His encouraging words gave her the confidence to try it out, and she ended up succeeding. There was a lot of hope in those early days. It seemed like they were forming a bond where they could support each other's aspirations and help each other achieve their maximum potential. But as their bond deepened, Elon's ambitions expanded. The dreams he had always had as an entrepreneur started to materialize. Ate up an increasing amount of his attention, and he started to let the traits that had initially attracted Justine take center stage. So, they broke up, and Justine went to Japan to be an English teacher. But things took a surprising turn for Justine and Elon following their little separation. Elon surprised her with a phone call only 1 week after her return from Japan to Canada. A rekindling flame was kindled by that phone call. Soon enough, Justine was gathering her belongings to go to California with him. Little did she anticipate how swiftly their reunion unfolded. They were engaged and later tied the knot in the year 2000. Everything appeared to be setting the stage for something truly remarkable. But when the first sheen faded, fissures began to show. Elon actually said something at their wedding reception that Justine chose to ignore since she was so happy for him. Yet still couldn't let go of the memory. He informed her of his position as the dominating partner in their relationship in a calm and almost matter-of-fact manner. The sentence had an odd weight that affected Justine, even if it wasn't uttered maliciously. It was their big day, therefore she didn't want to cause a fuss, so she ignored it. However, that remark did not simply disappear, it remained, and eventually became a recurrent motif in their relationship. What appeared to be a casual comment soon began to influence their interactions, and Justine began to sense the strain of the power dynamic. You know, Elon's first big achievement came a year before they got married. He co-founded the software company Zip2, and it sold for about $300 million. He transformed from an ambitious businessman with lofty goals into a multi-millionaire with limitless opportunities in the blink of an eye. Elon purchased an 800-square-foot condo with his windfall, a significant improvement that served as their initial residence together. It was as if Justine had stepped into a world she had only ever seen in movies. The experience was bizarre. With its modern layout and luxurious finishes, the condo seemed to portend a future filled with ease and adventure. However, that initial enthusiasm quickly faded as a subtle but unpleasant shift took place. The distance between their worlds widened in tandem with Elon's aspirations. He saw financial success as a hint to aim higher and do more. On the flip side, Justine felt like they were whisked away from the more innocent hopes and goals they had once shared, hopes for a life based on love, collaboration, and her own creative ambitions. Sadly, things only became worse from this point on. Especially in the wake of a terrible incident that cast a shadow over their lives. Everything changed in 2002 when Justine and Elon experienced a devastating heartbreak. For a fleeting second, their world felt complete when their first child, Nevada Alexander, was born. However, they were both devastated when Nevada unexpectedly lost away 10 weeks later from sudden infant death syndrome. The magnitude of the loss hit Justine hard. Crying it out, talking about her feelings, and grieving were all necessary for her. Elon, though, was so focused on finding a solution that his response was practically icy. As though avoiding thoughts about his son's death would ease his suffering, he became emotionally distant and refused to speak about it. It seemed like he was attempting to put it behind him without actually confronting it, according to Justine. A chasm sprang up between them as a result of their divergent approaches to grieving. In her grief, Justine felt as though Elon didn't or couldn't comprehend her plight. Elon seemed as if Nevada didn't even exist, according to her. She needed him to accept her grief and mourn alongside her, but he was too busy trying to mend fences to let her feel what she needed to feel. Elon gradually proposed having additional children as time went on. This was too much for Justine, who was still grieving, but Elon wouldn't budge. Quickly after beginning in vitro fertilization, they welcomed twins, and then triplets. Every milestone for Justine's new children served as a poignant reminder of the child they had lost, even though she was grateful for them. Elon felt like life had progressed past her pain, but she carried it with her. They were obviously on completely different emotional wavelengths, and that gulf widened with time. Things between Elon and Justine began to change in noticeable ways after their son Nevada's death. As Justine's grief progressed, she began to feel as though the world she and Elon had been creating together was crumbling before her eyes. She was swept up in a tempest of misery. And all she needed was a shoulder to cry on during those seemingly endless moments. Instead of facing the past head-on, Elon buried himself in his work, as if that would somehow make things better. His ability to suppress his feelings was a mystery to Justine. He was already planning the next major project or business deal, while she was still reeling from the loss of a child. Their mutual quiet deepened. Schedules, company strategies, and the logistics of raising their expanding family suddenly dominated conversations that used to be lively. Their once strong emotional bond now seemed like a distant memory. Isolation became an increasingly pressing issue for Justine as the months passed. She needed to vent to Elon about Nevada, her feelings of loss, and how she was carrying them, but he never changed his reaction. Or a brief shift in focus. He seemed to have moved on, leaving her behind in her unending sorrow. Their relationship appeared to deteriorate as Elon grew more preoccupied with his job. Despite her internal breakdown, Justine attempted to carry on as if nothing was wrong at first. She finally made up her mind to go to therapy. After months of feeling invisible and ignored, she felt compelled to do something she had never done before, attempt something new. Initially, it felt uncomfortable. Since her spouse didn't appear concerned, how could she possibly benefit from speaking to an unknown person? However, Justine's perspective shifted as the sessions progressed. All her efforts had been focused on supporting Elon's ambitions, she realized, while her own had been neglected. While the realization was difficult, it finally provided her with the clarity she had been lacking for quite some time. While all was going on, Elon was still fully absorbed in his empire back home. It was all business, albeit he seemed more engaged than in the beginning. It was as if he had no clue how much Justine was going through it. Whenever he tried to touch on her feelings, she either became distant or changed the subject. Although Elon's public persona necessitated a perfect family, she felt herself relegated to the role of supporting cast member in her own life. A new reality had emerged for Justine. She had changed from the idealistic young woman who had hoped to start a family with Elon. She transformed into a different person, one who struggled to maintain composure but ultimately failed. Even if therapy helped her see things in a different light, it was still not enough to make her feel whole at home. It was originally thought of as a team, a collaboration. At this point, it seemed like a one-sided deal in which Elon's goals were prioritized over hers. But the vehicle collision was the final straw. Thanks be to God, the crash wasn't very bad, but it did set off a chain reaction in Justine that she couldn't shake. She sat in the car, surprised but unharmed, and at that moment, she wasn't thinking about the accident. Elon was their first stop. Imagine his reaction. How concerned would he be? The apparent chasm in their emotional maturity was at an all-time high. The impact wasn't limited to the body. To confront the emotional devastation in her own life, it served as the necessary wake-up call. A sudden sense of isolation washed over her as she sat there, surrounded by the whirlwind of events. Surely this is a time when she should feel very close to her spouse. Still, she felt as though she were in a parallel universe to him. The revelation that our once close relationship had transformed into something cold and unfamiliar hurt. She suddenly felt as though the life they were leading, a life she had worked so hard to uphold, was all an act and not her own life. She spent a lot of time trying to fit in with Elon's world and be the ideal wife and mother, but she ended up losing sight of who she was as a person. The accident's aftermath shed more light on the situation than before. Life was wonderful on paper, but she had been merely going through the motions. From the outside looking in, it appeared like they had it made. Married life, financial success, and loved ones. It was different on the inside, though. Comparable to residing in an aesthetically pleasing home with foundational cracks, it was far from ideal. Their once shared love seems to have vanished. Silence and bitterness filled the void that remained. No longer could Justine turn a blind eye to it. She had been attempting to fit in with the roles she believed others expected her to play, but in the process, she had become detached from her own identity. She couldn't continue acting as if everything was alright as she wasn't satisfied with the life she had built, no matter how much she loved Elon. She had finally snapped. Her personal fulfillment, sense of self, and the things she had given up for their marriage were at the center of the argument, not Elon's incessant work or their lavish lifestyle. However, she still had a part of her that wasn't quite ready to give up. So much history, 5 children, and years of being together. Perhaps there is still hope for a solution. She was surprised by how difficult counseling was, but they gave it a shot. Just like before, Elon was totally absorbed in his business. He remained preoccupied with other things, even during therapy, rather than their relationship. Justine felt as though her words were hardly reaching anyone. She felt as though she was babbling into thin air. Just when things couldn't get much worse, Elon issued an ultimatum to her not long after. He was very forthright in telling Justine that they needed to work on their marriage right now or file for divorce. This was nothing out of the ordinary for Justine. They had been walking on uneven terrain for some time, but hearing it said so plainly was the last nail in the coffin. Quick to act and always with the right answer, Elon was the one who led Tesla. Yet Justine was unprepared for such a thing. The possibility that they could rediscover each other was something she desperately held on to. However, Elon was unconvinced. There would be no waiting for him. Never ending. Elon initiated the divorce process the very following day. Instantly, the union came to an end. She hadn't planned on things ending this way, but it seemed unavoidable. After all those years of sharing, their bond had finally faded, and now Justine had to confront the harsh truth of her life apart from him. There was no amicable split when Justine and Elon's marriage ended. There were a lot of court disputes, and it was messy and complicated. When Justine was young and naive, she foolishly thought her marriage would endure forever. Elon had persuaded her to sign a post-nuptial agreement years before. She had full faith in him at the time and never imagined she'd have to cast doubt on that paper. However, as their relationship deteriorated, she was ensnared in a contract that drastically curtailed her financial autonomy. Much of her claim had been diminished by the postnup. As a result of their joint fortune, she was left with nothing to do outside of their house. Although Justine's legal team discovered a possible avenue to contest the agreement, the realization that she had spent years bolstering Elon's career at the expense of her own ambitions was devastating. They brought up the fact that Elon had broken the law by not disclosing his entire financial condition when they signed it. Throughout matrimony, Justine would have a higher chance of receiving a reasonable portion of their assets if they could establish that the agreement was unlawful. But the road wasn't smooth. Given the stringent secrecy protections afforded by California law during mediation, challenging the agreement's validity would require disclosing sensitive information. The judge found in Elon's favor after the matter reached trial, respecting the deal made after the wedding. It hit Justine square in the stomach. This choice appeared to further demonstrate her lack of autonomy over her own life and finances, in light of all she had endured. Elon texted Justine 6 weeks into their divorce procedures to inform her that he was getting married to actress Tallulah Riley, adding insult to injury. She was overwhelmed by the news. How fast he had moved on was unbelievable to her. It broke my heart to know that all they had accomplished as a couple could be replaced in an instant. Justine, meanwhile, chose not to let that failure define her and instead pressed on. The marriage between Elon and Tallulah, on the other hand, had its own bumpy road. They were frequently photographed appearing head over heels in love after they tied the wedding in 2010, which brought their relationship into the public eye. But there were difficulties, as there are in most public marriages. After only 2 years, Elon decided to end his marriage in March 2012. They quickly reconciled and remarried in July 2013, proving that their bond was unbreakable even in the face of this obstacle. There was no miraculous resolution to the problems that caused their first divorce. Although Elon subsequently withdrew the petition, he did seek for a second divorce in December 2014. Shortly after, in March 2016, Tallulah decided to file for a divorce on her own. Later that year, they formalized their second divorce, ending a turbulent chapter in their lives.